Now to welcome from Adelaide, Reverend Phyllis. Phyllis, thanks for joining us today here in Melbourne. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Phyllis. It's always a pleasure to be part of your community.
Thank you.
Even though there's quite a distance in miles or kilometres between us. But the title for my talk, A Nobel Prize Goes To, may have had you wondering what I was going to talk about, but of course I'm talking about mums. But as instructed by Nobel in his will that was drafted in 1895, his fortune was to be set aside as a fund for the awarding of 5 annual prizes to those, he said, who during the preceding year shall have conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. The prizes, as he established in his will, are the Nobel Prize for Physics, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine, the Nobel Prize for Literature, and of course, the Nobel Prize for Peace. However, that prolific writer, Anonymous, penned a poem stating there is no such prize. I do apologise for that, probably one of my children. Yes, it is, it's my son. So we'll just let it ring out, and I do apologise for that. But as I was saying, that prolific writer, Anonymous, penned a poem stating there is no such prize for those persons in our lives that nurtured and loved us no matter what. Anonymous felt clearly this was an oversight and wrote, Anonymous wrote, Nobel Prize for Mothers. Mum, you are a shining star, though the world doesn't know your name. You have no fancy title like Baroness or Dame. Mum, you really are a star, my mother, mentor and friend. A Nobel Prize for Motherhood is what I'd recommend. And if I won the lottery, I'd share my win with you. I'd take you, Mum, on a spending spree each day the whole year through. You may not be famous, as your face is known to few, but Mum, I think you are wonderful, and I'm so proud of you. Yes, this writer clearly was writing about mum, mother, but there are so many people who step up to nurture us in all our varied relationships and circumstances in life. These are people we want to celebrate today, even though the tradition was set up to honour and celebrate mums. As a girl, telling her mum she was terrified of ghosts, and the mum told her, well, you can vacuum those ghosts away. She had me clean the whole house, telling me that I was getting rid of the ghosts. Would this be a Nobel Prize for creativity or ingenuity? What category would you say this mum would get? I love that little story. But as with any preparation I do for a talk or even classes, I do a little research thanks to Unity Books and Mr. Google. I always learn much more than I anticipate through this research. This time, I also asked some friends what Mother's Day meant to them. My friends generally replied that for them, Mother's Day was a time to remember and celebrate their mum or mother. One friend said Mother's Day should be every day. What do you think? And what does Mother's Day mean to you? Mother's Day has become a long time tradition when we are encouraged to celebrate and remember the one or more persons that nurtured, loved and supported us during our infant, toddler, teenage, and adult years. And I think we always nurture and love our offspring, no matter what age they are. But for me, it is a time to reflect on the many ways my mother was there for me. She's no longer there at the now, but I do remember her very fondly. And the one incident that remains very clear in my mind above all others is the night of February 10, 1965. I had rung my parents during the day and asked if I could come and stay. My husband was away fruit picking to try and make a few extra pennies for us. And I didn't feel like staying at home that night with my 16-year-old daughter. So off I went to Mum and Dad's. We had had dinner and I had put Vicky to bed, and we enjoyed an evening sharing time with one another. That was my mum and dad, and my younger brother was with us also. We had all retired, looking forward to a really good night's sleep. Vicky and I were in what was called the sleep out, which was a room that my father had built onto the back of the home, but the access to the home was through the small veranda and then the back door. It didn't seem that long after we had retired that I realised something was badly amiss, and I made my way quickly to the kitchen and called out, "Mum!" Fortunately, she didn't take long to respond and came to see what I needed, and she quickly realised I needed to get to the hospital, and very soon. She rang for a taxi, which took a very short time to arrive, as it was quite late in the evening. And from the time she first responded to my call and us arriving at the hospital, Mum remained extremely calm, reassuring me that all was okay. Wendy was born about 9 a.m. the next morning, in shock from loss of blood and 4 weeks early. Her first several days were sent in a humid crib, and although still very tiny but gaining weight, she was strong enough to come home a week after I was discharged, which was 2 weeks after she was born. I often asked Mum how she was able to stay so calm, knowing the situation was not good for me or the baby. And she would simply say, "I may have been calm on the outside, my dear, but I was panicking really badly inside." She knew that things weren't looking good. And I bless her for that. I had spent a few days with my mother-in-law earlier that same week, and I was so pleased I wasn't with her that night, because I don't think she would have got me through the same way as my mum did. But as I mentioned earlier, I did some research about the origins of Mother's Day, and I learned, after all these years, I actually learned that Anna Marie Jarvis, who is known to be the founder of Mother's Day in the United States, had heard her mother, Anne, frequently express a desire for the establishment of such a holiday. And after her mother's death, Anna led the movement for the commemoration. As Anna's mother had been a long-time member of Andrews Methodist Church, it was here that she visualised the celebration taking place. Anna's vision for the holiday was a religious celebration, validating, elevating, and appreciating the honour and dignity of motherhood as depicted in the Bible. The first celebration or memorial service, as it was called, of Mother's Day was held on May 12, 1907, which of course is the second Sunday in May of that year. And it was at Grafton, West Virginia. The celebration on the second Sunday of May to honour and appreciate mothers quickly spread throughout the States. And in 1914, US President Woodrow Wilson made it a national holiday. Anna was not happy, though, when she realised that the celebration had become commercialised. I also learned in my research that Mother's Day is celebrated on the fourth day of a Sunday in Lent in the United Kingdom and many other European countries. And this was originally called Mothering Day and dates back to the 16th century. Although mothers are honoured on this day, back then, the term mothering actually referred to Mother Church. And it came about after children of a certain age would leave their parents and go off into service. The boys would go off as apprentices to a master, and the girls would go into household duty services somewhere. But on this day, they would receive an off from their service and were allowed to return home and attend their home church or Mother Church for a service during Lent. They would also, of course, be able to celebrate with their family. And unfortunately, as with all celebrations that started as a religious observance throughout the year, Mother's Day has become very commercialised throughout the world. In Australia, chrysanthemums are the most popular Mother's Day flower. I'm not sure why. It may be that they are so prolific at this time of the year and they have the word mum within the name of the flower. They are also associated with friendship and support. But the original flower, I learned, was actually carnation, white carnation, which symbolises all the virtues of motherhood. Both flowers are very, very honoured and revered by myself, as I just simply love flowers anyway. But as I mentioned earlier, Anna wanted Mother's Day to validate, elevate and appreciate the honour and dignity of motherhood as depicted in the Bible. I was absolutely amazed how often mothers are mentioned in the Bible. In my concordance, there are literally lists of references to mothers in the Bible. But of course, some that we're all familiar with is Exodus 20:12, which states, "Honour thy mother and father," which we all know is the fifth commandment. And in Leviticus 19:3, it says, "Each of you must respect your mother and father," which is part of a ritual of moral code as stated in that book. But one of the other stories are about mothers in the Bible that I really enjoy rereading is the account in 1 Kings 3:16-28 that tells us of the mother's great love for her child. It recounts that two mothers living in the same house, each had each had an infant son, and they had come to Solomon because one of the babies had been smothered during the night, and each claimed the remaining baby was theirs. Solomon, in his wisdom, called for his sword and declared his judgment. The baby would be cut in two, and each woman would receive half. Of course, the woman who was the rightful mother said, "Oh, please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the other mother suggested King Solomon follow out his threat so that neither mother would have him. King Solomon, in his wisdom, knew then that the woman willing to give the living child to the other was the rightful mother, and gave him to her, saying, "She is his mother." Charles Fillmore said in The 12 Powers of Man, Mother love is as strong as life and will make every sacrifice to protect offspring. This wholehearted, self-sacrificing aspect of love indicates a spirit deeper and stronger than the animal or the human, and we are forced to admit that it is divine. For this reason, he says, mother love is exalted to first place in our analysis of the great passion. But mothers, he says, should take heed lest they incorporate human selfishness into the divine love that is expressed in and through them. When I read that from Charles Fillmore, it made me think, for some reason, of the poem that Khalil Gibran wrote on children, in which he states, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot dream, cannot visit even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, but nor tarries with yesterday. And that's only part of the poem, but I'll read the rest. And it made me think, yes, we have to be very mindful that we don't become selfish with our children. It can be very easy to do. We realise we want the very best for them, but I'm sure they each really know what's best for themselves. Metaphysically, however, we learn that women represent love. Surprise, surprise. We also know from our metaphysical study that all people have that quality, because love is one of the 12 innate qualities that we all share. However, it is more likely to be demonstrated in a woman's actions. There are numerous references to mothers, as I said earlier, in the Bible, and yet there are no specific instructions to be a good mother. And I know the comment is often made that being a mother does not come with an instruction book, unfortunately. And I find it very helpful to remind myself that my mother did the very best that she could with the knowledge and understanding that she had at the time. And I too, although I made many, many, many mistakes, did the very best that I could with my children that I knew how at the time. Would I do things differently now? For sure. I have more understanding and knowledge of what children really need. And I found it interesting, last night I watched a movie called Beautiful Day in My Neighbourhood. It was a rather slow movie, but gee, there were some really, really good comments made in it. And one of them that stuck in my mind was that we really need to look back and remember what it was like when we were the age of our children, and endeavour to be like that with our children. I know I didn't always do that. But what I do realise, even though I made many, many mistakes bringing my children up, was that no matter what they did, I loved them. I didn't always like what they did. It was the actions that I didn't like, not the child. And it's very important, I think, that we separate the two and not let the child think it is them that we don't like. It is simply the actions that we don't like. Of course, over the years, it is not only women who take on the responsibility of motherhood. There are grandmothers, sisters, aunts, fathers, and many other people who have been that positive example to young children, teenagers, and even young adults, who have taken on that role of loving and nurturing. Today, let us honour all those who are mother figures in someone's life and consider a Nobel Prize for which you think they are worthy. God bless and have a wonderful Mother's Day. And I do apologise for the interruption. It was one of the children I didn't tell I was doing the talk this morning. And he is normally in Tasmania, but he's visiting your state today. Or no, he was going home, I believe, today. But he's been in Melbourne at a wine festival, apparently, trying to spread the word of his wines.
Wow. Thank you very much, Phyllis. Wonderful talk. It's really good to hear. I remember first finding out about Anna Jarvis, and she had a real story, didn't she? And thank you for your wisdom that you shared with us today.